It's time for Recipe of the Day. Rewind back a few years. I used to make gravy just kind of willy-nilly. Whenever I was making a roast, I would get the drippings and start making gravy from them. And sometimes it would be like really delicious. And other times it would be too thin or too thick or too weak flavored. So it was kind of all over the place. Then I decided that I was done with that and I wanted gravy that turned out every time. And so I actually started measuring things and figuring it all out. And then of course I put a recipe for how to make gravy, kind of like a tutorial on Cook the Story. And yeah, now that's how I make gravy and it is delicious and perfect every single time. So today I'm applying that method to specifically making beef gravy. This is a just thick enough, rich and flavorful beefy gravy that is not too salty and has just a hint of horseradish in it. You can't detect it. You can't tell what it is, but it just makes it so good with the beef. I cannot wait for you to try this. So for this recipe, you do not have to be roasting a beef to make the beef gravy. I'm going to tell you first what you can use if you are not roasting a beef, and then I will set that information aside and I will tell you what to do if you are roasting a beef. There's kind of more steps to that second version, and you can apply what I'm saying to your alternate ingredients. So the alternate ingredients. Okay, so to make gravy standardly, you need some kind of fat, you need flour, and then you need your drippings or your liquid from the roast. And of course, you could do cornstarch instead of the flour, but that's a different method, and I'll talk about that towards the end. But you need fat, flour, and liquid. So if you want to make beef gravy and you haven't done a roast, you can use for the fat, you can buy beef tallow at the grocery store and use that for the fat, or you can use bacon fat. It tastes delicious in there. You can use bacon fat instead of the beef fat, or you can use butter. Then for the liquid, of course, if you're roasting in beef, you're going to get liquid from the beef that I'm going to be talking about. But if you don't have that, using unsalted beef stock is your best bet. You don't want the salt because as your gravy is cooking, it's going to be simmering and reducing, and that will concentrate any salt flavor. I often recommend that you don't add salt to your gravy until just before serving because of that. It just keeps simmering and thickening and concentrating, and so any salt is going to make it saltier. Now, having said that, if you want to use something like a beef bouillon, you can absolutely do that. It is saltier. You're just going to have to be a little bit careful. Like, don't add extra salt. Like I said, taste it right before serving and add salt then if needed. You probably are also going to not want to simmer it for a long time. Like, quite often I'll make gravy and then have it kind of sitting on the back burner just over low. I stir it every now and then. It's just kind of back there. You wouldn't want to do that if you've used something really salty in the mix because it is going to concentrate. Having said that, you can always add some extra liquid, extra water at the end to reconstitute that and have it not be as concentrated. But that is just something you have to watch out for. Okay, so those are the substitutions if you are not doing a roast beef that's going to get you that like fat and liquid. Now, I will say, even if you are doing a roast beef, sometimes you're not going to get what you need from it. So beef tenderloin classically is very, very lean. And so you don't get a lot of drippings from it. My beef tenderloin recipe counters that problem by having you smear the beef in butter before roasting it. And then you also put some unsalted beef stock in the pan under the rack that the roast is sitting on. And then the butter like melts and drips down over the beef, gets beefy flavor, and then goes down into that liquid at the bottom and kind of simulates your beef drippings. Also, the liquid on the bottom there under something like a beef tenderloin or under any roast that isn't going to be giving off a ton of juices, that liquid stops the bits of juices that you do get from burning when they hit the pan and then making things bitter or even unusable, like they're super stuck to the pan. So that little bit of liquid, it's going to protect those drippings. It's going to be reducing and browning and everything still, especially along the sides of the pan. So you will want to scrape those sides down if you add a little bit more liquid because it's running low. Give those sides a little scrape so that they can like get in there and concentrate in there with the other flavors. But yeah, so depending on your roast, you might want to add some liquid to the bottom of that pan just so that you protect the little bits of drippings that you do get. And then if you don't end up getting those drippings, if you don't get the fat, if you don't get enough of the liquid, and I'll be talking about amounts in a second, then you can top up the fat that you do get with some beef tallow, bacon fat, or butter, and you can top up the liquid with the unsalted beef stock. So that totally works to make up the amounts that you need. So if you are roasting a beef, I do recommend that you put a little bit of liquid unsalted beef stock or red wine in the roasting pan, and then the beef is on a rack above that, and the drippings are going to go down in there, and then you just add a little bit more liquid all the time, and it's going to be really, really good. Some people worry that that's going to like steam the roast a bit, and I guess that's sort of true, but I'm usually using a reverse sear method when I'm roasting my beef, which means that I'm hitting it with some really high heat at the end, so we're going to get a really nice crust, and any fear of that like steaming off any like brownings or anything, that's not going to be happening. But even if you're not doing the reverse sear, it's such a little amount of liquid, it's not going to make a big difference. The roast is not sitting in that liquid, it's up above it, so it really doesn't have any bad effect. So then once your roast is done, you're going to take it off of the rack, take the rack out of the roasting pan. You have that roasting pan there. I use a rubber spatula and scrape everything from in there into a gravy separator or a fat separator, it's called. That is my favorite way to do it. If you don't have a fat separator, just use a measuring cup, but I'll be talking about why you want a fat separator in a second. Okay, so you've poured everything, scraped everything into there. Then take like half a cup of dry red wine, something that you like to drink, or half a cup of unsalted beef stock, or even just some water. Pour that into your roasting pan, and then use that rubber spatula some more to really, really scrape up the bottom and all around the sides. There's a lot of flavor left in there. You won't believe it. And then pour and scrape that into your fat separator or measuring cup with those other drippings. Then you're going to leave it alone for a couple of minutes. And what's going to happen is the fat is going to rise to the top. We're going to use that fat as the fat for our gravy. Remember, I was saying that if you don't have the fat, you can use the beef tallow, bacon fat, or butter. But if you have this roast and if it gave off some fat, it's going to be at the top there. Now, if you did that trick with the beef tenderloin where you smeared butter on the outside, the fat at the top there is going to be mostly butter, but like beefy flavored butter because it was on that roast, you know? So then how much fat do you need? My ratio for gravy is the following. For 1 cup of gravy, if you want a thin gravy, you're going to do 1 tablespoon of fat and 1 tablespoon of flour. So for each cup of gravy that you want, you're going to use 1 tablespoon of each fat and flour, and also 1 cup of the liquid. So that's the beef stock or the liquid from your measuring cup or fat separator. How much gravy do you need? It kind of depends. A lot of people say 1/4 or 1/3 of a cup. I like lots of gravy. I like it all over my beef. I like it all over my mashed potatoes. If we're having like Yorkshire pudding or popovers or whatever those are, I like the gravy on there as well. So I err on the side of like half a cup per person. And then there's usually some leftovers, which I very much enjoy. So the recipe that I'm linking to today from Cook the Story for the beef gravy serves 6 people, and it makes 3 cups of gravy. So then you are going to want, for a thinner gravy, 3 tablespoons of fat and flour. But I like it a little bit thicker than that, so I go with 4 tablespoons. So you are scooping 4 tablespoons of fat off the top of your fat separator or your measuring cup. If there's not enough, use one of those other fats to make up the difference. You are measuring that into a medium-sized saucepan, and then you're adding an equal amount of flour. So in this case, 4 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. And you're going to use a whisk, and you just whisk that up really good so that it makes like a paste, which is called a roux. Okay, now we want to add our liquid to that. So this is where you look at what you have in your fat separator or your measuring cup and decide if you have enough. We need 3 cups. Now, you can make up the difference between what you have and 3 cups if you don't have enough with at most half a cup of red wine. Not so much though if you already used a half a cup to deglaze the pan earlier. That might be a little bit too intense unless you really love a winey flavored kind of gravy. Otherwise, you're going to make up the difference with some unsalted beef stock. Okay, so you want want 3 cups. And now your 3 cups of liquid are going to be sitting there underneath a layer of fat. If you are using a measuring cup, let that fat come back to the top because you just added some liquid to it, and then scoop off all the remaining fat that you can get off of that top, and you can save it for another use or discard it. If you're using the fat separator, this is where it is just a brilliant thing. You will see that the spout takes from the very bottom of the container. So when you pour from it, it is taking all the nice liquid from the bottom and leaving the fat behind. And then you stop pouring when you get to that fat level. Okay, so you have your 3 cups of liquid ready. You have whisked together your flour and fat. Now put the flour and fat in that saucepan over medium heat and just cook it for a minute or so. Some people like to brown that roux quite a bit, and that just makes a darker color for the gravy and also cooks out some of the flour flavor. But it also reduces the thickening power of the flour. If you are going to want to brown that a lot, you might have wanted to use extra flour and extra fat, maybe 5 or 6 tablespoons of each, and then you're going to brown it, which is reducing that thickening power of the flour. I don't worry about browning it too much, just a little bit, because the flour flavor is going to get cooked out when we're simmering the gravy later, so it's not as necessary. So cook it for a minute or 2 while stirring continuously, and then slowly start drizzling in your beefy liquids, a little drizzle at a time, and you just keep whisking and stirring. I will tell you, it is easier to do this off of the heat. The thing that causes the clumps is when the flour hits the liquid and starts cooking right away, like really quickly, and that's going to give you the lumps in the gravy. If you take it off of the heat to add your liquid, then you're not going to get as many lumps. But we're going to be straining this anyway, so if you get some lumps, it's not the end of the world. So you're going to just slowly stir in that liquid while you're whisking continuously. Stir a little more in, keep going, keeping it smooth the whole time until you've added the full 3 cups. Then you can bring that up to a boil over high heat, reduce it down to a simmer, stir it often through that process, and it's going to thicken up to be a wonderful gravy. Now, I like to add a little bit of seasoning to there. A 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder and a 1/4 teaspoon of onion powder is great. And then, like I said, a 1/4 teaspoon of horseradish. So it's not very much. It's just a little bit. It just adds this tiny little zing and like a tiny bit of even acidity, I think, because prepared horseradish is a bit briny and it just like transforms the gravy. I love it so much in there. So you add those things in and then give it a taste and add salt and pepper if you'd like. And then you serve it. I have a couple more things to say. If you wanted to use cornstarch instead of flour, you totally can. You're going to back up to where we had our 3 cups of liquid, and instead you're going to have 2 3/4 cups of liquid. So don't make up 3 cups, just 2 3/4 cups. And then you're going to measure 2 tablespoons of cornstarch into a small bowl, along with a 1/4 cup of cold or room temperature stock or water. And you just want that to be cold or room temperature because you don't want it to start cooking the cornstarch right away. So whisk that until that's smooth, and then put that in your medium-sized saucepan and stir in your 2 3/4 of a cup of liquid. And that is pretty much it. Everything else is the same. You can whisk in a little bit of fat if you want that flavor, but it's not necessary for any part of the process here. The cornstarch is dissolved in the liquid, not like the flour, which was essentially dissolved in the fat. And then I will just quickly tell you that if your gravy is too thick, you can always thin it down with a little bit of beef stock. More often than not, though, I find that my gravy isn't quite thick enough. It usually is, but if I want to thicken it more, my favorite way to do that is to do a beurre manière. That means kneaded butter. You mix together equal parts butter and flour, soften butter and flour, mix it until it's smooth. You're kneading it essentially to mix those together. And then you just dollop little bits of that into your gravy and stir. And it doesn't like dilute the flavor at all because it's the butter, and the flour does some thickening and they just sort of spread through the gravy like that. That's my favorite way. Alternatively, you can mix together 2 to 4 tablespoons of flour or cornstarch with some room temperature stock or water. Do it in a jar. So like 3 times as much liquid as you have flour in a jar, shake it up really good, and then drizzle little bits of that into your gravy, and that will thicken it as well. Whew, that was a long episode, but I am passionate about gravy, as you know. I will put the link to this recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there. Everything there is arranged by date, so it's helpful to know that today is December 15th of 2024. If you want more podcast episodes like this, make sure you are subscribed on your favorite podcast app. Search for Recipe of the Day and you will find me there. I'm Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.